They left her staked in the sun, 3 days, no water, no trial. The judge called it law. Doc McCall called it a line no man should cross. He rode down from the ridge, silent as dusk, and cut the girl free. No one saw them vanish, through dry gulches under moonlight, past sleeping hounds. By morning, the bounty doubled. Now the judge tightens his grip. Deputies, wanted posters. A gallows order signed at dawn. But the doctor carries something the judge doesn't expect. A sealed writ, a black ledger, and a memory that won't stay buried. What truth could turn a whole town against its own judge? The sun over Raven Wash didn't shine, it punished. At high noon, the whole town stood still. Shops shuttered, saloon doors swaying with a wind too dry to matter. Folks had gathered near the courthouse, but kept a careful distance from the girl tied to the mesquite post just beyond the boardwalk. She was maybe 18, skin burned and lips cracked. Her hands were bound at the wrists above her head, stretched taut to the bark. A small silver pendant rested at her throat, a carved jade leaf dark with dust and sweat. Judge Horace Pike stood beneath a black parasol, fanning himself with his court order. 3 days, he declared to the silent square. Let the sun do what justice demands. No one answered. A few turned away. One mother pulled her boy behind her skirt. The sheriff looked down at his boots. Up on the ridge, beyond the last sloping roofs, a figure watched through a battered spyglass. Asa McCall, once field surgeon for the 3rd Illinois, now horse doctor, trapper, and reluctant neighbor to the town of Red Bluff, slid the glass shut. His knuckles whitened. He didn't ride down then. Not yet. Not in the light. Instead, he waited. Darkness came slow in the desert. Long shadows stretched like reaching fingers, and the heat eased just enough to move without leaving a trail of sweat. Asa packed only what he needed: his canteen, a sharp knife, a wool blanket for silence. No rifle. The mule knew the route well, down the switchback, past the dry arroyos, through the cottonwoods that choked the south bend of the wash. When Osa reached the girl, her knees had buckled. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. He didn't speak either. One clean slice through the rope, a whisper of water at her lips. He lowered her gently over the saddle, draped the blanket, and stepped into the stirrup behind her. His mule turned without command. They rode west, not toward home, but through the cut banks, narrow gullies too crooked for chase and too steep for searchlights. The girl stirred once. Asa pressed her hand lightly. She quieted again. A mile ahead, 2 bounty men lay by a low fire, their laughter thick with whiskey. Asa cut a wide loop through the junipers, every hoof placed like a thought. By the time the fire was just a flicker in the distance, the stars had taken their place overhead. The girl breathed steadier now, though her body slumped against his chest. At dawn, they reached a ridge beyond Coyote Spring. Asa lifted her down, let her rest against a stone. That's when he heard it, a rifle crack, sharp, too close to be a warning. Then came the sound that mattered more. Hoofbeats, heavy, urgent, close. The price had gone up. In the hush of that desert morning, Doc McCall looked out across the sand and brush, his hand steady on the reins. He didn't pray, he didn't curse. He just whispered, "We ride." By the time they reached the edge of Coyote Spring, the sky had gone that heavy gray before dawn. Asa McCall slid from the saddle, knees stiff, back aching. The girl, light as she was, had been near dead weight the last hour. Her head rested against his coat. She didn't stir. He didn't knock. Miriam Shaw opened the stage stop door in her nightrobe, lamp raised. Her eyes widened when she saw the bundle he carried. "Another quiet midnight mercy?" she asked. "Something like that." She stepped aside. "Bring her in." Inside, the heat from the iron stove hadn't yet touched the room. Asa laid the girl, Apache no doubt, on the cot near the back wall. Miriam fetched a basin, clean rags, and honey water. Asa checked her breathing, still shallow but better. "Judge Pike's doing?" Miriam asked. Asa only nodded. She bit her lip. "How long?" 12 hours at least. Any longer, and her mind might have split. She got a name? Not yet. Before Miriam could press, a knock sounded at the back door. 3 slow, 2 quick. Asa froze. Miriam moved first. She opened the root cellar hatch and pointed. Go! You know the way he hesitated. I won't hide from truth. You'll hide for her sake. Now go. He slipped into the dark, dragging the trapdoor closed behind him just as the door swung open. Bootsteps. Then a low voice. Mrs. Shaw? Judge Pikes declared a fugitive emergency, looking for a stolen girl and the man that took her. Miriam's tone didn't waver. Only thing I'm harboring is a stovetop pie and a past I don't talk about. Y'all want a slice? The lawman hesitated. We'll check the barn. Above, Asa held still. In the blackness, a second voice whispered from beside him. Never known you to drag trouble into a woman's cellar. It was Josiah Bell. Asa exhaled. You still keep whiskey down here? I keep regrets and turnips. You brought both. They sat quiet until footsteps faded. When they climbed back out, Miriam handed them coffee. You can't stay long, she said. He's posted bounty riders at the pass. Asa took a slow sip. I need someone who knows paper better than bullets. That'd be Rafe. Miriam motioned toward the front porch, where a lean young man leaned against the railing, scribbling in a notebook with charcoal fingers. Rafe Calder, she said. Half reporter, half mosquito. Won't stop biting till he draws blood. Rafe looked up, saw Asa, and blinked. I heard you rode out of the army on a mule in a bad mood. Still got both, Asa replied. The younger man tucked his notebook into his vest. You found her? The girl they said stole a ledger? I found a girl. Whether she stole anything, I don't know. But what they're doing ain't law. Rafe nodded slowly. There's a black book. I saw it. Clerk at the courthouse. Names, dates, shipments. Not cattle, not goods. People, Asa said. Children, too. Bell spit into the dirt. Pike always wanted his own kingdom. Just then, the girl stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, searching. Asa knelt beside her. It's all right now. You're safe. She whispered something in Apache, barely audible. He caught the word for leaf. Her hand touched her pendant, jade, smooth, carved like new spring. Rafe looked closer. She's got a mark, he said, pointing gently. Near the collarbone. Asa froze. He knew that mark. He had seen it once, in the firelight of a raid that left only ash and silence. Something long buried stirred in his chest. In the stillness of that morning, with bounty posters stapled across Red Bluff, and a girl whispering lost names in a tongue older than the town, Doc McCall realized this wasn't just rescue, it might be redemption. What would you do if someone you saved turned out to be someone you lost? Drop a comment, like if you're riding with Doc. Subscribe to keep riding. Asa McCall sat hunched over a lamp, pages spread across the stage stop's back table. Ordinances, seals, legal print worn thin from years of folding and hiding. His spectacles rested low on his nose, catching the flicker of the flame. Outside, the wind groaned against the walls like a restless animal. Across from him, Josiah Bell chewed the end of a pencil. You sure you're not looking for the law in a place it ain't never been? Asa didn't look up. I'm not looking for justice. Just daylight and ink. He held up the arrest warrant Pike had signed, taken from the girl's discarded pouch. The seal looked off. The outer rope design was missing a loop. This ain't the territorial mark, Asa said. Red Bluff made their own die. Its counterfeit. Josiah leaned closer. You can prove that? I don't have to. A U.S. Marshal just has to see it. Rafe Calder stepped into the room, hair still wet from a cold rinse at the spring. Marshal's 100 miles east. Then we ride, Asa said. But first, we write. He pulled a sheet of clean paper and began drafting affidavits, witness statements from Miriam, Josiah, himself. He quoted from the Territorial Code of 1869. No person shall be punished or restrained under town ordinance outside jurisdictional limits. The girl, Rafe said, was tied out past Pike Creek. That's 4 miles outside Red Bluff. Exactly, Asa said. Illegal detainment, and worse. If we can prove she was trafficked, that brings in federal law, peonage, unlawful restraint, kidnapping. He folded the affidavits with care, pressed wax over the flap, and sealed it with a rusted field ring from his army days. "What about the girl?" Josiah asked. "She got a say in this?" She lay near the stove, wrapped in a patchwork quilt Miriam had sewn from old feed sacks. Her eyes were open now, sharper, listening. Asa approached gently and knelt beside her. "Can you understand me?" She blinked once, slowly. "What's your name?" Her lips parted. The word came out dry but certain. "Tala." Asa nodded. "Tala. We're not sending you back, but we need to ride through town to reach the marshal." "It's risky." She stared at him, then touched her pendant, the carved jade leaf. Her gaze didn't waver. "I think she trusts you," Miriam said from the doorway. "More than she trusts anyone else alive." Asa stood and looked to Josiah and Rafe. "We hide her. But we ride that evening." They hollowed out the floor of the freight wagon behind the stage stop. Miriam laid down blankets. Tala crawled in, small and silent. Rafe passed her a small mirror, cracked but clear. "Signal if you need help," he whispered. Josiah checked the mule team's tack. "Won't be long for Pike gets wind." "I want him to," Asa said. "What about the envelope?" Rafe asked. "I'm sending it with Bell. He rides to the wire station near La Cueva and telegraphs the federal circuit judge in Santa Fe." Josiah grunted. "You sure he'll listen?" Asa fastened the saddle cinch on his old mule. "He'll listen if he sees the seal. And the counterfeit one Pike's using." They set off under a moonless sky, stars like salt scattered on black wool. Josiah peeled off to the south, Rit tucked in his boot. Rafe took the reins of the wagon. Asa doubled back alone, slipping through dry gullies toward Red Bluff. He needed them looking for him, not the girl. As the wheels rolled over sand and hope, and Doc McCall melted into the brush with only shadows for company, he whispered the oath he once made over battlefield dead. "First, do no harm, but don't let harm win either." Sunday brought warmth to the cottonwoods and pie to every hand. The annual church picnic, held in the wide bend north of Red Bluff, had always been a place for soft music, soft talk, and second helpings. Folks came from ranches near and far, women in summer shawls, boys skipping stones, old-timers eyeing chessboards like battlefields. But this year, the sky felt tighter. Asa McCall stood near the edge of it all, leaning on a fence post with dust still on his boots. His coat was plain, his hat low, but his eyes scanned every face, every lean against a tree, every twitch of a deputy's jaw. Somewhere nearby, Pike's men were already sniffing. He didn't have to wait long. The judge's black wagon rolled in bold sun glinting off the polish. Horace Pike stepped down in his summer waistcoat, flanked by two new hired guns. One of them, red beard, broad chest, clutched a roll of papers like it was the 10 Commandments. Pike wasted no time. "People of Red Bluff," he boomed, voice too loud for such a soft Sunday. "I come not to disturb, but to secure. Fugitives have taken advantage of your hospitality, men who would traffic in lies, in chaos, in fear." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some folks stiffened, others kept chewing their pie. Pike held up a folded map. "These men are known accomplices to Apache outlaws. A stolen ledger, a false narrative. I seek your help in rooting them out." He turned to the sheriff, who looked uncomfortable in his starch. "With my authority as presiding circuit judge," Pike said, "I am authorizing the search of all wagons and personal property on these grounds." The crowd quieted. A woman, mid-30s, brown apron dusted with flour, spoke up from the baked goods table. "Since when does a church picnic fall under town arrest?" A few heads nodded. Quietly, Pike gave a slow smile. "Emergency measure. Signed and filed." That's when Asa stepped forward. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You're out of your lane, Judge." Pike's eyes narrowed. "Well," Dr. McCall Asa faced him square. "This picnic is 2 miles outside Red Bluff limits. Territorial code says no town ordinance applies here, unless called for by the mayor, not a judge." He reached into his coat, slowly, carefully, pulled out a slip of paper, not the writ, just a page of law. "I'd invite you to read this, sir." Out loud, Pike ignored the paper. "I'll read nothing from a man aiding fugitives." At that, Miriam Shaw stepped from the pie tent with 2 fresh mugs of coffee and handed one to a deputy. "Let's not spoil the sponge cake," she said cheerfully. Rafe Calder, never far from a moment like this, lifted his sketchbook and began drawing faces. Deputies, townsfolk, even Pike's glare. His charcoal smudged fast and confident. "Sketching treason now, are you?" One deputy sneered. Rafe grinned. "Only if you spell it right." Tension thickened. The sheriff looked between Pike and Asa. Then he looked down. From the depot, a faint click-click echoed. Telegraph. Someone had sent a wire. Asa caught the sound. So did Pike. The judge's smile faded just a shade. A boy ran up from the tracks, holding a slip. He didn't give it to Pike. He gave it to one of the ranchers, a man named Talbot. The man read it, eyes widening, then whispered to his neighbor. It spread like wildfire in a wheat field. Josiah Bell had reached La Cueva, and he'd sent the writ. Pike took a step back. Not much, but enough for Asa to see it. In that moment, the picnic air shifted. Not with rifles, not with fists, but with one quiet word passed ear to ear. Truth. Sometimes that's all it takes to start turning a crowd. By dawn the next day, the desert wore a strange stillness. Not silence. There were the usual rustlings of lizards, the low groan of a breeze, but a tightness, like something was watching its own breath. Asa McCall stood beside the telegraph pole on the east trail, watching the wire twitch. The clerk in La Cueva had confirmed receipt. The writ, real, stamped, and federal, was now en route with a marshal in tow. He folded the slip, slid it into his coat, and turned back toward the waiting wagon. Tala sat quietly in the rear compartment, brushing dust from her skirt. She had asked no questions that morning, just nodded when he said they needed to keep moving. Rafe tugged the reins. "We still heading to Ortiz's ranch?" "Yes," Asa said. "Don Rafael keeps clean records and longer memory than most judges." Rafe flicked the mule gently. "We'll get there. He's not fond of Pike." As the wagon clattered off, Asa looped south alone. His goal, distraction. He rode straight into Red Bluff, plain as salt. No cloak, no lie. The town's main street was already humming. Sawmen unloaded rough-cut gallows timber. 2 of Pike's men stood on the boards, laughing, measuring rope. Asa dismounted in front of the general store, tipped his hat to no one. Inside the sheriff's office, heat clung to the walls like bad news. "You have no authority here," the deputy snapped, rising fast. Asa held up the telegram. "Marshal's coming. Best you clean your desk." Another deputy stepped behind him. "You think wire threats scare us?" Asa turned just enough to see the edge of the man's coat, the bulge of the holster. "I don't believe in threats," Asa said. "Just consequences." Then Pike entered. He didn't shout, didn't smile either. "Dr. McCall," he said, calm as a preacher. "We've been expecting you." 2 more men appeared. Asa didn't resist. They marched him across the boardwalk like a trophy. Townsfolk looked away. Some lingered in doorways. A few boys stopped playing with marbles. Outside the saloon, one of Pike's men kicked Asa's hat into the dirt. Pike followed, cane tapping with pride. "Search him." They yanked his coat off. Empty. "No envelope?" Pike asked. Asa said nothing. "Shame," Pike said, and smiled again. "Shame." They shoved him down into the mud, hands behind his back. A passing wagon slowed. The driver frowned. Asa met his eye, said nothing, and let the image hang in the air. The spectacle was the point. Pike's version of justice wasn't written. It was displayed. But what Pike didn't know? The real envelope, the one with the original writ, affidavits, and seal, was riding south in the boot of a crippled lawman headed for the La Cueva line shack. And as they dragged Asa into the cell, a stable boy slipped in through the alley door, hands shaking, cheeks red. He held out something wrapped in oilcloth. "A message," he whispered, pressing it into Asa's palm. "From the girl." She said not to trust shadows, only horses and children. Asa nodded, breath tight. The boy was gone before the deputy returned. Inside the cloth, a second envelope. Real. Untouched. Josiah Bell had made a copy before he rode out. In the jail's dim light, with boot scuffs on his chin and blood on his collar, Asa McCall held the future in his palm, not forged by power, not sealed by fear, just truth, written bold, and the promise of law bigger than one man's gallows. The jail cell was dry, cold, and narrow, more fitting for feed storage than a man. Asa McCall sat on the wooden bench, wrists raw from iron, coat slung over a bent nail, and dust clinging to his sleeves like shame. The envelope, real and sealed, lay tucked inside the lining of his boot. He hadn't dared move it since the stable boy passed it over. One mistake, one pat down too thorough, and Pike would have it. Again. Outside the bars, the sound of boots echoed, slow, deliberate. Judge Horace Pike appeared like a man arriving for supper. He strolled in, holding something between two fingers like a prize pheasant's tail feather. "This," he said, dangling an envelope, "is your righteous case?" He tapped the paper gently against the bars. "I'll tell you what's in it, doctor." His voice dropped. "Nothing." He tore it open with a knife tip, unfolded each page, holding them up for show. Blank. Every one. "See, I'm not stupid," Pike said with that curled smile. "Your friend Bell may have reached La Cueva, but the message he sent back, intercepted. The law doesn't move faster than me. Not out here." Asa stared, saying nothing. The silence was deliberate, steadying. Pike leaned in. "You're alone, McCall. And you're too late." He turned and walked out, whistling a tune that didn't belong in a jailhouse. Hours passed. No light filtered in, just the drifting dust of old rafters, the tick of Asa's heartbeat. Across the room, the sheriff's chair sat empty, and the night deputy hadn't returned. Then came soft footsteps, not boots, not spurs, bare feet. "Tala?" Asa called gently. "No," came a whisper. Miriam Shaw stood at the window slit, face pale in the moonlight. "She tried to come." I stopped her. "She wanted to trade herself for you." Asa swallowed hard. "She shouldn't have to. She said you gave her water when no one else would." Miriam pulled something from her shawl, a bundle of cloth, inside it a piece of bread, a tin of salve, and a worn harmonica. "She said you knew a song," Miriam said, "an Apache lullaby." Asa looked at the harmonica and shook his head slowly. "I knew a girl once. Small, sharp eyes. She sang it to her baby sister during a raid, trying to keep her quiet. They didn't make it." His voice cracked, but he pushed on. "I remember the song, but not the names." Miriam held his gaze. "Maybe she remembers for both of you." Later, after the jail went still, that song came back, soft, rising through the cracks between walls. Not sung loud, not meant to stir a crowd, but it curled around Asa like a memory unburied. The notes bent and turned, half lullaby, half mourning. He leaned forward, hands folded, listening as if through smoke and time. The harmonica's tune wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And it carried him back to a tent hospital after Gettysburg, to screams. Then to a girl humming to a sister already gone. Asa lowered his head. Maybe some things didn't end where they began. Then, metal on metal, the door creaked open. Deputy Cole stood there, eyes darting, lips pressed. "Judge says it's time for a march to the square," he muttered. "He's building the gallows himself." Asa rose, slow and firm. Cole unlocked the cuffs. "I'm sorry, Doc." Asa said nothing, but in his pocket, he pressed the envelope tighter against his palm. Still there, still sealed. As the sun climbed behind Pike's scaffold, Asa stepped out into the street. No longer a doctor held by law, but a man carried by memory, justice, and something more than pain. The promise of truth still waiting to rise. The gallows waited, but so did something else. By midday, the square looked like a fairground run dry. No children played, no horses shifted in their hitchings, just the heat, the dust, and a half-built gallows standing like a threat no one dared name. Judge Horace Pike climbed the platform as if it were his pulpit, black coat fluttering in the dry wind. He motioned to his clerk, who stood at the base with the black ledger tucked under one arm and a crooked smile. On the far side, a crowd gathered in stiff clusters, storekeepers, ranch hands, school teachers, a few curious drifters. Most kept quiet, but they came, And then, movement at the South Road, a rider first. Old Josiah Bell, his limp visible, even from a distance, raised a battered tin star in his right hand. Behind him, 2 more horses carried U.S. Marshal Whitaker and his deputies, dust trailing like flags of justice. Gasps rippled across the square. Pike stiffened. "This is my jurisdiction." "You'll wait your turn," Marshal Whitaker said, dismounting with the confidence of law that didn't need raising voices. Bell stepped forward, holding 2 cast-iron stamps. "These belong to the Territorial Recorder's Office in Santa Fe. 1 real," he held up the worn brass die, "and 1 counterfeit." He lifted the second, shiny, too clean. "This one matches the seal Pike used on half his emergency orders, including the warrant that put that Apache girl under the sun." A low murmur rolled through the crowd. Doc McCall stood now beside Rafe Calder, both recently freed. Rafe clutched his notes, sweat dotted his collar, but his voice rang clear as he stepped up onto a crate near the platform. "This ledger," he said, lifting the black book. The clerk had dropped in the scramble. Details names, transactions, and amounts for sales, of people, women, children, delivered to mines out past Las Mesas. Judge Pike's name appears on 12 entries. Pike sneered. "Fabrication!" Doc stepped forward and raised the envelope, sealed, stamped, and real. "Filed writ, signed by Federal Circuit Authority. Your emergency powers are suspended, Judge. Your gallows is now evidence." Whitaker nodded. "Deputy, take the platform." "Disarm him." Pike's hand twitched toward his pistol. He never reached it. A wooden bucket, sailing clean across from the bakery tent, crashed into his hand. Miriam Shaw stood behind it, arms crossed, apron flecked with flour. "Try that again," she said calmly, "and I'll throw the skillet." Pike staggered. One of Whitaker's men caught him by the arm and twisted him down, iron clicking over wrist bones. The square exhaled. Doc turned to the people. This wasn't justice. It was business in robes, but it ends today. Then for the first time, Pike said something no one expected. "She was mine," he shouted, throat raw. "I rescued her from savages, civilized her, raised her to obey." Every breath in the square seemed to pause. Doc stepped down, walked slowly toward the scaffold, boots thudding with certainty. "She wasn't yours," he said. "She was never yours." The marshal pulled the judge to his feet. "Horace Pike, you are under arrest for unlawful imprisonment, fraud, conspiracy to traffic, and abuse of office." Behind them, the crowd parted. A single horse approached, Tala riding steady, scarf braided into her hair, eyes calm and unflinching. At the platform's base, she dismounted and stood tall, letting the sun hit her face fully. And from behind the merchant's cart, another figure emerged, an Apache elder, long braids silvered with age. He looked at Tala, then at Doc. His voice cracked in English. "That girl wears the leaf of my niece. And the birthmark. Matches what we lost." He turned to Doc, gaze, softening. "Why do you carry her pendant in your vest, old man?" Doc touched the jade leaf, thumb trembling. "I didn't know. Until now." The square held its breath as truth landed, heavier than law, deeper than revenge. Sometimes justice rides in late, but when it arrives, it plants both feet, and it stays. The wind dropped. For a moment, all Raven Wash stood still, not by force but by something older, the weight of truth. Judge Pike, still in irons, didn't spit or snarl now. He sagged in the marshal's grip, eyes fixed on the boards beneath his boots. The fury had drained from his face, leaving behind something smaller, empty, afraid. Marshal Whitaker gave a nod, and the deputies led Pike and his clerk off the scaffold, toward the depot's holding car. The square parted just enough for them to pass. No one cheered. That kind of justice didn't earn applause. It earned silence. Sheriff Daltrey stepped forward, hat clutched in both hands. He tried to speak, but nothing came. So he bowed his head and stepped down. Formally, finally, no one stopped him. Rafe Calder scribbled steadily, lips pressed tight, brow damp with sweat. "Sworn testimony's coming in like floodwater," he muttered to Doc. "The whole town saw. Half of 'em lived it." Doc nodded once, eyes fixed on Tala. She stood beside the Apache elder now, face forward, braid over one shoulder, the jade pendant glinting in the sun. The elder touched her collarbone gently, and for a long time just looked at her. "This mark," he said softly. "I remember it." He turned to Doc. "The night soldiers raided our winter camp, we lost 2 girls. One was just learning to walk. Her mother died with the name Tala in her mouth. We buried what we found, but—" his hand trembled. "This one lived." Tala stepped closer to the old man. "You knew my mother?" "She was brave," he said. "She braided your hair with leaves." Tears filled her eyes. "And sang?" "Yes. That song." He closed his eyes and hummed the same soft tune. Doc swayed. Slightly, something catching in his chest. That melody, the one he'd carried all these years, without knowing why. The elder turned again. "You kept her pendant. Why?" Doc's fingers curled around it where it lay in his vest pocket. "Because I failed a child once," he said. "And I didn't want to forget." The elder studied him, then nodded. "You didn't fail her. You brought her back." Marshal Whitaker cleared his throat, stepping onto the gallows stairs. "By the authority of the United States, I declare all emergency orders issued by Judge Horace Pike null and void. Those imprisoned under his directive are hereby released. Effective immediately." Across the square, a jailhouse door opened. Women stepped out first. Apache, Mexican, one white girl no older than 14, then boys. One of them limped, another blinked against the light like he hadn't seen the sun in days. Miriam wrapped her shawl around the youngest. "You're safe now," she whispered. Josiah Bell stood near the preacher, and watching it all. "It don't take fire and bullets to clean out rot," he murmured. "Just enough folks standing still long enough." Rafe finished scribbling and looked up. "Think this'll hold?" Doc rested a hand on his shoulder. "Only if folks remember why it started." Just then Tala walked to Doc, holding something in her hand, a folded letter, yellowed and creased. "I found this in the judge's ledger," she said. "It's from a Dr. Asa McCall, written 20 years ago." Doc took it carefully. His handwriting stared back at him. It had been a petition for custody, for a girl who was never returned, stamped denied in cold red ink. "She's mine?" he asked softly, eyes flicking to the elder. The old man nodded. "By blood. And by choice, if she'll have you." Tala looked up at Doc, voice quiet. "You don't owe me anything." He smiled. "I know, but I've got room and quiet and horses that don't bite." She grinned slightly. "Then maybe we start again. Sometimes justice walks in boots. Sometimes it rides a slow mule through gulches. But every so often it sings an old song back into the world and names what was lost. Weeks passed like wind across dry wheat, quiet, steady, and full of change. At the edge of Apache territory, near the scrubland where coyotes once howled undisturbed, a new building stood half-finished, board and batten, nothing fancy. But it held windows that opened wide, and a porch deep enough for wading boots. The sign above the door read, "McCall and Daughter, Doctoring, Horsework, Translations." Inside, a cast-iron stove warmed the place. Tala swept wood shavings from the corner where a cot had been set up for overnighters. She wore her braid looped and tied, a soft scarf tucked in her collar, and Doc's old riding boots, 2 sizes too big, but worn in just right. Doc McCall knelt over a boy's scraped leg, bandaging slow and sure. "Don't pick at it," he said. "I won't," the boy lied. Tala smirked, translating anyway, then added something extra in Apache. The boy's eyes went wide. "She said it'll rot off if I do." Doc raised a brow. She shrugged. "He'll remember that better." Outside, the elder who'd named Tala nodded to passing riders. His presence kept peace like a windless day, unspoken but strong. The nearby ranchers had grown used to seeing him lean against the rail fence, eyes steady, pipe smoke curling upward. Rafe Calder came and went, his notepad never far. He was writing something big, he said. Bigger than a story. Maybe a series. "Truth sells, turns out," he'd said once, grinning. "Even when it's gentle." The town itself had shifted. Pike's gallows was taken down. Planks burned, hardware buried. The sheriff's badge now sat on a younger man's chest, one who listened more than he barked. Josiah Bell helped him when needed, but mostly stayed retired, whittling and nodding at shadows. Miriam's Bakery offered free rolls every Sunday to children born within a week of the trials. She called them freedom buns, and no one had the heart to argue. And the railroad men? They backed off. Word had reached the higher-ups. Raven Wash wasn't for sale, not anymore. One morning, as golden light cracked across the horizon, Doc walked outside, coffee in hand. He paused at the porch post. Hung from a nail was his old pocket watch, still ticking. Tala joined him. "You sure about keeping your name?" he asked. She nodded. "Tala's who I am, but I added something." She pulled a folded letter from her skirt pocket. "Tala McCall, legal now." He looked away for a second, eyes shining just enough to sting. "You still got that pendant?" he asked. She tapped her chest. "Every day." The elder stepped up the path just then, carrying a rolled parchment. "For the charter," he said. "Town council's writing up rules, against what Pike did. Against anyone trying again." Doc unrolled it. Near the bottom, a clause banning forced labor, unlawful detainment, and sale of persons under territorial law. He handed it back. "That'll hold." From down the ridge, Rafe lifted his camera and waved. "Say second chances." Doc raised his mug. Tala raised her chin. Click. Evening came soft. A mule brayed near the corral. Somewhere, the elder's pipe glowed red under the porch lamp. Doc sat beside Tala. No words for a while, just wind through grass. Then, quietly, she asked, "What would have happened if you hadn't stopped that night?" Doc didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "I reckon I'd still be up there, alone." "Wondering what I missed?" She nodded. "Glad you didn't." He smiled, the kind that didn't need teeth. "Me too. Some stories end with noise. Others end with a porch, a name reclaimed, and a wind that finally feels kind. If stories about courage, mercy, and quiet justice speak to you, go on and subscribe, partner. Saddle up for the next ride.